Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Instant Insights podcast. At Global Data Strategic Intelligence, we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG, and macro themes impacting all major sectors. I'm your host, Holly Anness-Bradshaw, and today I'm joined by Aoife McGurk, a senior analyst here in Strategic Intelligence, and Ed Mitchard, who is the chief scientist and co-founder of Space Intelligence. In this episode, we'll be looking at the use of AI for sustainability. We'll discuss what AI tools are best suited for use in ESG work and how to balance the moral obligations of environmentalism with the use of AI. So, Aoife, I'll start with you. You are currently working on Global Data's upcoming report looking at the use of AI tools for sustainability purposes. Do you mind giving us a quick introduction to this topic and what you've been researching so far?
Hi, Holly. Yes, absolutely. So the interaction between artificial intelligence and sustainability is a really hot topic at the moment, with lots of confusion and major claims flying around. The truth is that there are both genuine upsides and downsides to using AI for sustainability reasons. If companies are going to successfully manage their climate risk, developing a clear strategy to maximize the good and minimize the bad, rather than just blindly using AI for everything, will be the key. So on the positive side, there are already compelling use cases of AI supporting sustainable outcomes for companies across many sectors. So AI can support renewable energy optimization, precision agriculture to prevent fertilizer overuse, improving building energy efficiency with AI-driven sensors, supply chain optimization to reduce waste, and even climate monitoring to detect emissions and support ESG reporting. The key thing here is that these AI tools are being used to directly reduce energy use and therefore emissions. It's making a tangible difference. But it isn't all upside, so the sustainability potential of AI systems has to be carefully weighed against the environmental costs. Advanced AI can lead to large volumes of carbon emissions through AI model training and inference or queries, as well as the construction of the data centers these models rely on. Data centers also require large volumes of water for continuous cooling, creating physical and reputational risks for companies. So to navigate this tricky landscape, companies have to carefully weigh up the real tangible benefits that can be gleaned from AI versus the emissions generated by these advanced AI systems.
Thanks for that introduction, Aoife. Ed, thank you for joining us today. Space intelligence is nearing its 10th birthday, so do you mind giving our listeners a bit of background about yourself and what space intelligence does?
Sure, and thanks for asking me on. Yeah, these are some very interesting topics. So I have an academic background. I used to be a professor at the University of Edinburgh, where I worked on combining different types of satellite data sets to make maps of how tropical forests are changing. So looking at how their carbon storage changes due to natural growth, but also human activities with chainsaws, so deforestation and degradation. And also how we map things like the growth of tree crops, which are things like cocoa and coffee compared to pasture or slash and burn agriculture. So making these good maps is something that nowadays we probably call AI. Back then it was big data and machine learning, but effectively it's combining hundreds of views of every bit of the earth into big data stacks, terabytes or many terabytes of data, and applying machine learning to those to make accurate maps based on real ecological knowledge. I'm not really a technical AI person by training. I'm an ecologist. I think I've spent probably a year or more of my life walking around tropical forests measuring trees. So you use a tape measure and set up forest inventory plots. I've probably measured by hand about 15,000 trees and been involved in raising $10 million or so of funding for setting up forest inventory plots across, I think, 13 or so tropical countries, and using that data combined with satellite data to try and make the case for protecting tropical forests from deforestation. So this is a real problem, separate from AI, that we are still pumping CO2 into the atmosphere and destroying biodiversity every year by cutting down tropical forests. About 1% of tropical forests are deforested or severely damaged every year. So that's about 10% a decade. And that's responsible for about 20% of anthropogenic carbon emissions. So it's crazy that's still happening. And I guess as an academic, I was frustrated along with some colleagues that we didn't feel we were making a difference. We were publishing papers, giving higher and higher resolution ways of watching the world's tropical forests shrink without really being part of any solution. So myself and my colleague, Murray Collins, set up Space Intelligence in 2018 to try and operationalize the mapping products we were doing and get those into the hands of companies that could then try and fund projects that pay local communities to do other things than cut down forests or pay them to restore forests. And yeah, as you say, nearly 10 years on, we're 38 people based mostly in Edinburgh. We have someone in Singapore, and we're serving companies and projects around the world trying to use our mapping data to make a difference to the fate of forests.
Amazing. So Aoife mentioned the associated emissions with data centers and the excessive amounts of energy and water, but also spoke about some of the really great use cases for AI for sustainability purposes like climate monitoring and also say forest monitoring as well. So Ed, I wanted to ask you, as someone who's been researching the impact of climate change on forests and deforestation, how do you balance the potential environmental toll of using AI with the benefits of the work it can add to space intelligence?
Yeah, I guess even before this massive push for AI, we were heavy users of data centers. So to make a map, to try and help stop deforestation in a part of Brazil, we would analyze tens of thousands of satellite scenes over that bit of Brazil. We couldn't possibly download that data to our computers here in Edinburgh. It would cost us an absolute fortune, and it would take months or years on a normal internet connection to download that many terabytes and petabytes of data. Instead, we analyze those data where they're sitting in the cloud. We move our algorithms to those data centers. So pretty much we're using Google Cloud platforms, GCP, Azure, or AWS. Those are where we're going to do the processing. And we're very incentivized to use as little processing power as possible while still making good maps. And that's the fundamentals. We spend a lot of effort as a company trying to make sure we don't do silly things with the data, like download a load of satellite data sets and leave it on hard disks that we're paying for anything more than the minimum amount of time, or use big machines with big GPUs when we could get away with using a cluster of much smaller, cheaper machines. So it's a big optimization dance for us, and we really try and keep our usage as small as possible, given we're doing this big mapping. And I think that's a general principle that could be applied across a lot of things. So we have a financial incentive to reduce our costs, and that also reduces our environmental impact. And it's the same with AI use. So encouraging people to use the smallest, lightest model they can get away with will mean many fewer servers get lit up if you use a flash model rather than a deep one, and making sure you're using it for a useful purpose. So we use big chunks of compute when we're making a map. You could use a similar large amount of compute, probably heavily subsidized by a tech company, to make yet another cat video or some other big kind of computational task that isn't really helping the world. And I think we'll see that switch happen naturally over the next 12 months, because it seems that the big producers of AI models are increasingly charging people the actual cost of running these models, which is a lot of tokens to run these things. And that should push people away from the frivolous use to thinking about using these tools only when they have a real commercial benefit. Or if you're using it for fun, then you'll be pushed towards the lighter, cheaper models, which should have less environmental impact.
So I guess leading on from that, what sort of things do you consider when choosing what tools specifically you use or what partners you work with? I think you kind of briefly answered that there, but
I guess in the grand scheme of AI, relatively simple things, to in the scheme of AI, very big data sets. So the satellite data sets sit on servers in a few different places around the world. We're currently using Microsoft Azure as our data provider, because they have good solutions for what we do, and the cheapest, and they have good environmental credentials as far as we can see. They at least let us track our emissions as well as tracking our costs, which we like. But yeah, we move our algorithms to their data centers. I think that the data centers we're using right now with them are mostly in mainland Europe, just because that's a fairly close place to us that has the complete archives of these satellite data sets downloaded. And yeah, whether we're mapping Brazil or Vietnam or Indonesia, the mapping data crunching will be done in the same kind of Western Europe nodes where the data are sitting. We do collect data from countries, but that will be working with local partners to go measure trees. That's not related to the satellite data sets that happen there. The satellite data sets are collected by people like the European Space Agency and NASA, and then archived by these big corporations.
So at Space Intelligence, you also help companies with EUDR compliance and Scope 3 emissions. Has AI impacted any of these solution offerings that you have since you founded the company?
Absolutely. So I guess we use these big tech companies to help us produce good maps, but also these big tech companies are part of the demand for carbon credits. So For example, we provide the kind of due diligence and checking for something called the Symbiosis Coalition, which is a coalition of buyers of carbon credits, including Google, Meta, Microsoft, Salesforce, and some other companies. So they've clubbed together to work with the Symbiosis Coalition to choose projects. These are all reforestation projects around the tropics, and our data, which uses AI and runs on these servers, helps with that. Scope 3 emissions and EUDR. So EUDR is the European Union deforestation regulation. It's a law that's coming into effect in the EU at the very end of this year, on 31st December. And it gives a list of commodities that include things like soybeans, coffee, cocoa, cattle products, palm oil that can't be imported into the European Union if they are grown on land that's been deforested since the end of 2020. That's kind of not that hard to meet right now, because if you imagine a cocoa tree that will have been growing for 7 or 8 years before it produces a lot of cocoa. So most of those will have been planted before 2020. But increasingly, it's going to get harder and harder to take things into the European Union if they're onto recently deforested land. We've seen that having a bit of impact already, but clearly it only works if you have good satellite data sets that really show where is and isn't forest as of the end of 2020, this cutoff date. And that's actually harder than it sounds, because what is forest is based on a strict definition, ultimately comes from the FAO. That's around the amount of canopy cover of tree cover in an area. So area has to be at least 10% canopy cover of trees within a half-hectare area and not be used for crops. So that might look not very green in the satellite image. If you have like scattered trees, a bit like a parkland with grasses, that might count as forest. You can't deforest that. But other areas might be very dense canopy. There might be 100% canopy cover, look like a tropical forest, but actually have coffee or cocoa growing in the understory. If that was happening before 2020, then that's not forest, and you're allowed to carry on cultivating from that area. So we got involved in EUDR, and we have a big contract with the owners of the New York Stock Exchange, a group called Intercontinental Exchanges, to provide mapping data across 39 countries to be able to separate those two. If you can't separate those well, then the densest, best from a biodiversity point of view farms, often held by smallholder farmers with a small area, might get thought of as forest and be excluded from the supply chains and excluded from the European Union. It's the last thing we want. So we use all this AI and data to help us differentiate these difficult to separate areas, so areas with coffee or cocoa growing in the understory compared to forests that shouldn't be deforested to grow new coffee or cocoa. To use that, we rely on incorporating data from lots of different types of satellites. So the kind of optical satellites like you'd see in Google Earth, a bit like a camera in the sky, but also radar satellites that send pulses of microwave radiation at the surface and kind of listen for the microwave ping that comes back. Those see the world in a funny way, but they see through the top of the canopy and give you information on what's growing underneath. So we've developed ways of using sophisticated tools to incorporate this different information about the world over a whole year to try and separate those different use cases.
Yeah, it all sounds amazing. So Aoife, I'll bring it back to you now. For working within the ESG and sustainability space, what should they consider when integrating AI into their workflows?
So there are several different layers of concern that sustainability professionals need to wrestle with before fully integrating AI into their workflows. So we've already discussed the environmental cost a bit. Data centers consume vast matter and are often common in areas with high carbon intensity grids and especially high levels of water stress. So without careful sourcing, AI tools, even when used with the best sustainability-focused intentions, can inadvertently worsen emissions or strain water resources, and this has a real impact on people. Bias is a ESG concern when using AI in sustainability. So many AI items just aren't that transparent. We don't always know how they make decisions, what data they're trained on, or whether that data reflects structural bias. And in ESG contexts, potential bias can distort environmental justice efforts. It can lead to the misclassification of risk and can even end up harming vulnerable communities inadvertently. Companies need to make proactive efforts to consider these very real concerns now, as failure to recognize them could expose them to significant risk down the line, particularly regulatory risk, reputational, and even financial risk. There aren't many mandatory frameworks forcing companies to consider these risks at the moment, the AI specific side, but it would be, I think, naive to assume that that will never happen. But as Ed was saying, not all AI carries the same level of risk here. Often the types of AI that are the most harmful environmentally are those that are actually the least useful for sustainability purposes. So traditional predictive AI models, especially those that Ed was saying were once known as big data or just machine learning, they often have far lower computational footprints and rely far less on massive data centers. I mean, still quite a lot, but much less than advanced AI systems. But at the same time, they're often far more adept at delivering real, measurable emissions reductions than big, woolly, generative AI chatbots, or even agentic models, which can sometimes be overkill for the task at hand. So ESG and sustainability strategists should definitely bear this trade-off in mind when weighing up whether they should use AI or not.
And lastly, from you, Aoife, what are your biggest takeaways you want our listeners to have when considering AI sustainability use cases?
There are three things I want listeners to take away from this discussion. It would probably be one, the opportunities for AI to drive forward the sustainability agenda are very real and they're powerful. AI can make energy use more efficient, can help detect emissions we didn't know we had, and support smarter agriculture, supply chains, and renewable energy use. And this is all happening right now. But thing two, these improvements also come with risks, where inadvertent emissions can cancel out the sustainability gains. So this needs to be properly mapped out and considered. And finally, if you are using AI for sustainability reasons, make sure you match the AI tool to the task at hand. So generative AI isn't always the right answer, and sometimes a leaner, simpler machine learning model or remote sensing based system is more efficient, delivers more return on investment, and can have a smaller greenhouse gas footprint.
And similar question for you, Ed, as someone working within the ESG and environmental space, do you have any words of advice or kind of final thoughts you want our listeners to take when working with technology, but managing to stick to environmental principles?
Yeah, in general, I don't know, obviously we're not just talking about using AI chatbots. So there's other big processes and using Claude code that we use extensively to help review and write code for our processes. In general, think about how much you need to use actual compute. A good kind of metric of how much compute you're using is how long a task takes. So if you can use a flash model rather than a big model, or do something locally rather than on a server, it will run quicker, and that suggests much less compute, water, kind of space and resource will have been used. In general, it's hard to get very good CO2 kind of equivalent numbers for the use of these tools because it's maybe hard for the tech companies to be fully transparent here. Maybe they don't have good numbers themselves, and it definitely varies a lot by site. But just the nature of producing and buying all these massive GPUs, putting them into new data centers with all the concrete and building there, and then the electricity, which may not be coming from clean resources to power these. It's clear every bit of use, every second you're spending using on these high-powered GPUs is producing additional carbon to the atmosphere. So yeah, in general, use the lightest model you can get away with, and try and be careful about how you scope your tasks. So the more you can tell this model what exactly you need, give it additional information, the less work it will have to do itself to kind of search the whole internet and find things out. So it's just definitely use these AI tools. They're going to be part of what enables us to continue to grow economically without having to use more and more resources. I definitely see them as being helpful in terms of raising the productivity of individuals, which can lead to greater living standards and greater services for everyone without having massive environmental cost. But we're only going to get there if we use them responsibly and kind of sip at them rather than just spending all day sending big queries and having a dedicated set of servers running at your beck and call all day. That's not going to work if that's repeated across a billion users.
Well, thank you both for those instant insights. To find out more about our global data reports and Ed's work with space intelligence, there will be links in the description below. And for us in strategic intelligence, we'll see you next time.